Hi, I'm gonna start doing my video journal and I'm gonna start with the portrait of myself. I'm gonna use the portrait of myself as a guideline. I suppose that because I submitted everything together, um, the reviewer has all of these documents on a PDF. So I'm gonna talk about this first picture right there. It's me and my parents. As you can see, I am wearing a dress, a very nice dress, and my dad is wearing a suit, and my mom, although you can see her, she's also wearing a suit. So both my parents are white. My dad's parents are from Spain, and my mom is Colombian. She identifies as white. I was born in a city of 11 million people, according to the census, the ethnographic census that I've seen. 98 to 99% of people identify as white or are considered white. So, in a way, I it is I know that the majority of the black population, which is hovers around 11%, lives in other regions in Colombia, mostly the Pacific region and the North Atlantic region. There is a benefit to identifying as white in a classist, racist country like Colombia. So that's why I think a lot of people um, might identify themselves as white, because of internalized racism and colorism. So even though this is true, I do know that in my school most people were Caucasian, and except for two Indian kids who were in my school for 2 years, they were the son and daughter of a diplomat who was only in Colombia for 2 years and they left. I expand that on that a little bit more on the letter to myself, but the kids, from what I know and what I saw, were mostly sidelined and ignored. Um, I think that one of the things I learned very quickly from my upbringing was that children learn about societal norms very fast. And sometimes I think that adults don't even know that kids understand things like strata and socioeconomic status and racism, but I think that they do internalize those norms from a very young age. Um, so I do believe that in sidelining the two kids who were um, dark and from a foreign country, from a country that was in Colombia and who couldn't speak English, there was a certain level of xenophobia and racism and colorism that we as children had internalized from the way that we saw our country treat other fellow Colombians who were darker. So one trend that I saw that was very clear was that the people who were the wealthiest and the most affluent were usually white, and the people who were the darkest were usually poor. So both my parents worked. They worked from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. They would get home for dinner, and most of my time I was in school or I was taken care of by my maid. Um, my maid was black. She was a black woman from Tumaco, which is a city in the Pacific region of Colombia. And she was the only black person I ever knew until I moved to the United States. So I had that dichotomy of living in a white space for the majority of the time, seeing shows that were solely where the cast was only white people, except for like a very few secondary actors who were people of color who would mostly reenact stereotypes of people of color. But aside from that, I did have my main caretaker, who was black woman from a poor region in Colombia that was plagued by very grave social and economic issues. So that was interesting to have to grapple with, mainly in hindsight, because I remember that as the white child, I never really asked questions about her or her race or where she came from or how she felt in my house or um, any of that. I saw her as a caretaker. I liked her a lot. I cared for her, or so I thought, until I grew up and I realized that I never really concerned myself on getting to know her. So one of the things that I might want to take into the classroom is understanding how hegemony is built and talking to kids about how easy it is to uphold a normative, racist, white supremacist society or ideology from a very young age, and how easy it is for nobody to question anything that has to do with that hegemony. So moving on to when I moved to the United States, I got my citizenship in 2016, and I think that when I moved to the United States, it was a little bit different. I think I, for the first time, was the other. When I came here, even though I had gone to a British school, my English was not as good as other children, so I could participate in class and I didn't have to take additional classes, but it was difficult to speak to people my age because they expected me to speak in a pace that I couldn't speak. I couldn't speak as fast as them. I didn't master the vocabulary that they mastered. I didn't have any understanding of slang. So I think it was a very, very awkward first year for me in terms of getting to know people and the social dynamics at my public school. I also felt that I had to learn English very well in order for me to be accepted into society, and I felt that at public school I got lost in the crowd. I felt like I was not being celebrated for my abilities. I wanted to take Spanish because that was the only class where I felt smart and where I felt that I had a voice. But my counselor said that because I was a freshman, I could only take Spanish 3, which was not what I wanted to do. I wanted to take Spanish, like the highest level of Spanish, because that was where I was in terms of my level. But I was not allowed to do that. I was also not allowed to take AP History. So I somehow and very audaciously decided to go on the internet and look for an independent school that would support my learning and where I would feel that the teachers were more, I don't know, worried about challenging me and making sure that I was being challenged. And also I wanted to find a boarding school where I could speak English 24/7. So I found Choate. Choate is known for being an elite prep school. So I, again, changed from being the other to being part of the heteronormative elite of the United States. At Middlebury, I did not feel like the other. I felt like I was part of the pack, mainly because there were so many other international students. And I felt like we had similar upbringings as well. So it was interesting to jump from not feeling included at public school to feeling very included at Choate. But even then, sometimes I do get comments that because I'm Hispanic, I surely did not belong at Choate, or like, surely I probably felt bad, or it probably wasn't the school for me, which is not the case at all. I felt very included. But if anything, and from my experience at public school and at boarding school, I would probably try to talk to my students about uh, the multiple identities that one can have and how identity is very dependent on your personal experience and where you're at. There are certain contexts where you're going to be the other, and certain contexts where you're not going to be the other, and how you can um, always be encouraging others to be inclusive. Um, so that's something that I try to do at Chode. I feel like because I had already had the experience of being singled out or in a way marginalized by my peers at public school, I try to be more accepting. So I will try to talk to my students about the importance that experience has on learning, and um, the importance of understanding that maybe because they haven't experienced something, they're not going to try as hard to do something. So, maybe for a white child, it might be important to understand that Black people have very different experiences than they do. And so it is important for them to recognize that, and to recognize that because they don't have certain experiences, um, it is important for them to be empathetic and not judge people and not assume um, things about other people, and always try to think about an event attached to the experience of a person. So I'm gonna probably leave the video journal there, but I guess I have other things I'd like to talk about perhaps later.